In the final week of April 1945, as the last embers of fascist Italy flickered in the shadow of the Alps, an unusual series of sightings along Lake Como began to stir quiet alarm within British intelligence. The Special Operations Executive, already embedded in northern Italy to monitor German withdrawals, intercepted scattered reports that contradicted what everyone believed was inevitable: that Benito Mussolini was cornered, trapped, and running out of time. But among the chaos of collapsing lines and fleeing officials, a small SOE team stationed near Menaggio documented a troubling mismatch in the official timeline of Il Duce's movements. It was a detail subtle enough to dismiss, yet persistent enough to question. Why were the accounts of his convoy's final hours so inconsistent? The struggle to uncover the truth unfolded amid a landscape crumbling by the hour. The German 1st Volkschirmjäger Division was retreating north, blowing bridges behind them as they fled. Partisan groups of the 52nd Garibaldi Brigade roamed the passes, seeking to intercept fascist loyalists escaping toward Switzerland. And caught between these opposing forces were British and American intelligence units working to prevent high-ranking Axis officials from vanishing into the Alps. SOE operatives faced the same challenge: sift fact from fiction amid a swarm of panicked refugees and retreating soldiers. The fog of war, dense and choking, made every rumor deceptively plausible. In a field report dated April 27, 1945, Captain Harold Whitby of the SOE wrote a line that would later fuel years of speculation: local testimonies do not align. Subject may have separated from primary column earlier than recorded. The subject, of course, was Mussolini himself. Whitby's remarks stemmed from conversations with civilians in the villages hugging Lake Como's western shore. Several claimed to have seen the dictator's motorcade passing at unusual hours, while others insisted he traveled not with the German convoy but in a separate, smaller vehicle. These discrepancies nagged at Whitby, who understood that even a rumor about Mussolini's escape could trigger political upheaval in a moment when Allied command needed certainty. Historical insight sharpens the edge of Whitby's concerns. In the closing days of the Italian Social Republic, Mussolini had become increasingly obsessed with the idea of a final redoubt, an Alpine fortress where he could continue the fight. German advisors, too, speculated about the possibility of a last stand north of Lake Como. Even as Allied forces pressed through Lombardy, the dictator held on to fantasies of resisting surrender. This context added weight to the witness accounts. If Mussolini truly hoped to reach the Swiss border or the Voltellina Valley, he might well have attempted a split from the main convoy. Yet the most unsettling discovery came from the scene of Mussolini's supposed capture at Dongo. SOE observers arrived shortly after partisans announced they had apprehended the dictator. But the scene they found was strangely curated. His bodyguard unit appeared confused, offering conflicting statements about when and where they last saw Il Duce. Some claimed he had switched vehicles. Others insisted he remained in the main column. Among the belongings seized in the convoy were fascist documents that referenced alternative extraction points, clues that were curiously overlooked by the partisan command. Whitby's notes again captured the tension. Possible decoy scenario. Recommend further verification before confirming identity. The reveal came when SOE intelligence compared partisan timelines with independent civilian accounts. The differences were not subtle, they were glaring. The partisans declared Mussolini captured around midday on April 27. Civilians, however, described a convoy matching Mussolini's description passing through their village late the previous night, heading north. Another villager recalled seeing a man resembling the dictator boarding a smaller German truck near Menaggio. None of these accounts aligned cleanly with the official version. The question that lingered was simple, unsettling, and profoundly consequential. Had the man seized at Dongo truly been Mussolini, or had Il Duce switched vehicles hours earlier, leaving a loyalist, or even a double, to be captured in his place? For modern intelligence analysts, this discrepancy raises the same lesson it did in 1945. In moments of collapse, truth becomes fragile. The speed at which stories solidify into accepted history can mask the alternative possibilities that lie beneath. With German units retreating, partisan groups eager to claim credit, and Allied command pressed for confirmation, the environment was primed for a narrative that demanded closure, even if the facts did not fully support it. As the SOE compiled its notes and sent its findings south to Allied headquarters, the tension thickened. Whitby and his team were not prepared to declare Mussolini's escape, but they were equally hesitant to validate the official account. Too much remained unverified. And as conflicting testimonies mounted, the possibility that the dictator had slipped away from Lake Como in the final hours of the war became harder to dismiss entirely. The truth, at that moment, hovered in a narrowing space between chaos and certainty. And as the Allies pushed deeper into northern Italy, the question grew more urgent. If Mussolini did not die at Dongo on that April afternoon, then where had he gone? And who had helped him vanish into the mountains? In the first days of May 1945, while celebrations erupted across liberated cities in Italy, U.S. Army units pushing north through Lombardy encountered something far less conclusive than victory. Abandoned fascist convoys scattered along mountain roads, stalling in ditches, or overturned in the frantic retreat toward the Swiss border. Among the debris, officers of the 10th Mountain Division noticed a pattern that disturbed them: coded fascist documents, fragments of maps, and half-burned papers referencing what looked like prearranged escape corridors. These findings raised a troubling question. Had Mussolini, or someone acting on his behalf, prepared a more elaborate exit route than anyone had suspected? The struggle for clarity fell directly onto the shoulders of units moving through the region. The 10th Mountain Division, trained for winter warfare and steep terrain, advanced along the Lake Como region with both caution and speed. Their mission had originally focused on cutting German escape routes over the Alps, but as partisan chatter intensified, their orders expanded. Officers were instructed to secure any high-ranking fascist officials attempting to flee, and to interrogate them immediately. The problem was that every captured minister and officer seemed to tell a slightly different story about Mussolini's last movements. Some insisted he'd remained with the main column until the very end. Others swore he had diverged from the convoy just before its interception. One OSS field report from May 1, 1945 noted, "Subject may have been extracted from convoy approximately 2 to 4 hours prior to partisan contact." This pointed to a narrow, critical window during which Mussolini could have vanished into one of the many Alpine routes leading north. The document referenced testimony from an Italian officer captured by the 10th Mountain Division near Chiavenna. The officer insisted that a smaller escort, possibly German, had peeled off from Mussolini's column near Musso under cover of darkness. His claim was met with skepticism, but the detail about a small German team would later resurface in other interrogations. The insight provided by these initial interrogations began shaping a broader picture. As OSS officers dug deeper, they discovered that remnants of the Italian Social Republic had drawn up last-minute evacuation plans weeks before the regime collapsed. Some were borderline delusional, visions of an Alpine redoubt where fascist forces could regroup. Yet others were more practical. Designated safe houses, supply caches, and mountain guides familiar with smuggling routes used during earlier periods of political turmoil. These documents suggested that escape corridors existed, not fantasies, but operational plans that Mussolini could have used if he sensed impending capture. The most compelling reveal emerged when an OSS team recovered a charred satchel from a wrecked staff car near Calico. Inside were 3 still readable pages of a coded message referencing a transfer point near the entrance of the Voltolina Valley. Portions of the message were unreadable, but one line stood out: asset to proceed under German protection, final extraction via Northern Pass. Historians would later debate what asset meant in this context, but in the moment, OSS analysts saw it as possible confirmation that a clandestine route had been planned. American intelligence officers faced a unique challenge interpreting the information. They were acutely aware of the political implications surrounding Mussolini's fate. If U.S. forces confirmed even a suspicion that he might have escaped, the stability of post-war Italy could be jeopardized. For this reason, OSS command approached the investigation with caution. Every document was photographed, every interrogation cross-referenced, and every civilian testimony weighed carefully. Yet the deeper they investigated, the more inconsistencies emerged. The application of these findings to modern analysis reveals a familiar pattern. In collapsing regimes, loyalists often prepare multiple escape contingencies, some overlapping, others contradictory. The chaos of retreat leaves behind fragments, clues that can imply a sophisticated conspiracy even when the truth is more mundane. But in this case, the clues align too neatly to dismiss outright. The coded documents, the testimony from captured fascist officials, and the movements of German units in northern Italy suggested at minimum that someone of significance had been meant to escape via the Alpine passes. As the 10th Mountain Division and accompanying OSS teams pressed north, they realized they were racing a clock that had likely already run out. The war in Italy was entering its final moments. German command structures were disintegrating. Units surrendered en masse. If Mussolini, or any other top fascist figure, had managed to slip out of Lake Como before partisan forces intercepted the convoy at Dongo, he would now be traveling through some of the most inaccessible terrain in Europe. The close of this chapter left investigators with an uncomfortable truth. Despite the triumphant headlines announcing Mussolini's death, the evidence collected by American forces in early May 1945 did not fully match the official story. The discrepancies were not proof of escape, but neither were they easy to dismiss. Somewhere in the mountains ahead, the trail of the missing dictator, or his double, was growing colder with each passing hour. And the next phase of the hunt would lead Allied intelligence deeper into the rugged heart of the Voltolina Valley, where rumors of an Alpine redoubt refused to die. By early May 1945, the fog of war had thinned across much of Italy, but in the rugged mountains north of Lake Como, it seemed to cling stubbornly to the valleys, as if concealing a final, unfinished chapter of the fascist regime. Within the labyrinth of steep trails and isolated passes, Allied intelligence officers believed they were edging closer to uncovering the real path Mussolini might have taken if he'd separated from the convoy at Dongo. And as SOE and OSS teams traced the rumors of a hidden retreat, one name surfaced repeatedly. The Voltolina, the proposed site of Mussolini's Ridotto Alpino Repubblicano, an Alpine redoubt where die-hard fascists hoped to stage a symbolic last stand. The struggle for U.S. forces navigating this muddy, mountainous terrain was immense. The 85th Infantry Regiment of the 10th Mountain Division spearheaded much of the reconnaissance effort, advancing along narrow ridges armed with carbines, Thompson submachine guns, and the mountaineers' signature ice axes strapped to their packs. These troops had spent the winter breaking German defensive lines across the Apennines. Now they pushed through the Alps with the same relentless resolve. Their mission no longer focused solely on rooting out remnants of German resistance. It also carried the heavy weight of confirming, or disproving, whether Mussolini had fled north under German protection. Insight into the fascist redoubt concept reveals why the Voltolina became such a focal point. Mussolini had long been fascinated with heroic, last-stand narratives. In the final months of his collapsing regime, he spoke privately of a fortified Alpine zone where loyalists could resist Allied forces and negotiate from a position of symbolic strength. German officers, desperate to maintain Italian morale, did little to discourage these fantasies. Whether a functional redoubt ever truly existed remains doubtful, but the idea served as a powerful psychological anchor for fascist officials during the final weeks of retreat. As American and British patrols advanced through the Voltolina, they found hints that someone had moved through the region shortly before their arrival. Scouts from the 85th discovered a half-collapsed shelter high above Morbegno, its fire pit still containing war members. A small cache of German-issued medical supplies, bandages marked with Wehrmacht inventory stamps, lay scattered nearby. The equipment was too valuable for partisans to leave behind, suggesting whoever fled did so quickly, and under pressure. An OSS analyst later noted, supplies consistent with small escort unit could indicate movement of priority individuals. Though the report did not name Mussolini directly, the implication was difficult to ignore. The reveal sharpened when British SOE operatives interviewing civilians along the valley encountered a shepherd who reported seeing a group of Germans with an Italian officer dressed differently from the others. The shepherd claimed the party traveled at night, moving with discipline and urgency, and appeared to avoid main trails. When shown photographs after the war, he could not confirm Mussolini's identity, but his description of the officer's attire matched Il Duce's preferred leather coat. The shepherd also recalled that the group stopped only briefly before continuing toward the high pass leading toward Bormio, a route historically used by smugglers and political dissidents alike. This period offers a modern application. Intelligence gathering relies as heavily on pattern recognition as direct evidence. Here, the patterns were unmistakable. Fresh camps, medical kits, controlled night movement, civilians reporting unusual activity. These clues suggested a coordinated escape attempt, even if they lacked definitive proof of Mussolini's presence. Analysts knew that if Mussolini had indeed attempted escape, he would have relied on small, mobile teams moving discreetly, avoiding major roads, and leaving minimal traces, exactly what these patrols were uncovering. But the Allies soon encountered a barrier more formidable than terrain: time. The war in Europe was collapsing rapidly. On May 2, 1945, German forces in Italy formally surrendered. Units that had been fierce enemies only days earlier were now disarming themselves before American officers. This transition created a strange limbo, one in which critical intelligence might emerge or vanish within hours. Some Wehrmacht soldiers, now willing to talk, hinted that elements of their 1st Volkssturmger division had, in the final days, been ordered to escort a valuable Italian. Others denied any knowledge, while still others claimed they heard rumors but couldn't distinguish truth from panic-driven fantasy. It was in this delicate moment that an SOE patrol recovered a map fragment near a small alpine hut overlooking Tirano. The paper bore faint pencil markings aligning closely with the route Mussolini would have taken if he'd fled the convoy earlier than reported. The notes on the margin were incomplete, but contained a chilling phrase: "Should we fail, hand over the duplicate." Whether duplicate referred to documents, a codebook, or a person was never determined. As Allied investigators gathered these clues, a subtle shift occurred. What had begun as a straightforward verification of Mussolini's death had transformed into a deeper inquiry, one that questioned the reliability of the official timeline itself. The Americans and British were not ready to declare that Mussolini escaped through the Voltellina, but they were equally unable to dismiss the mounting evidence of a smaller, faster-moving group that had slipped through the mountains during the chaos. The chapter closed on an unresolved but tightening thread. If Mussolini had indeed traveled this route, someone had arranged it with precision, leaving behind only whispers, warm ashes, and faint tracks in the alpine soil. And that raised a new, more unsettling question. Who had orchestrated the extraction, and how far had they managed to go before the trail disappeared into the peaks? In the first days after Germany's surrender in Italy on May 2, 1945, the Brenner Pass, long a strategic artery between the collapsing Reich and its southern front, became a corridor choked with confused, retreating soldiers. Thousands of Wehrmacht troops streamed north, carrying rifles slung low, many with their hands already raised in preemptive surrender. Amid this mass of disorder, British field interrogators from the intelligence corps arrived with a singular purpose: to filter rumor from truth, and to determine whether any German units had participated in a covert escort operation involving a high-value Italian asset. What they uncovered was a web of half-truths, contradictions, and unsettling consistencies, clues that hinted at a shadowy extraction whose details had been deliberately wiped from official records. For British investigators, the struggle began with the interrogation of officers captured near Vipitino, Sterzing, a small town just south of the Austrian border. These men belonged to fragments of the once formidable 1st Volkssturmger Division, elite paratroopers now reduced to disorganized clusters trying to evade partisan patrols before surrendering. Many of them had thrown away insignia, others carried incomplete papers. Their condition suggested a hurried retreat, but also the possibility that certain files had been destroyed intentionally. Major Colin Reeves, a seasoned intelligence corps officer assigned to the sector, reported, "Several paratroopers spoke vaguely of escort orders. None produced written instructions." The absence of documentation, Reeves noted, could be attributed to desperation, or to secrecy. Insight into the Volkssturmger's late-war operations reveals why their testimony carried weight. Throughout the Italian campaign, these elite troops had often been selected for sensitive missions: unit protection details, high-priority withdrawals, and defensive operations requiring discipline under chaotic conditions. If any German unit had attempted to escort Mussolini or a high-ranking fascist figure through the Alps, Volkssturmger elements were among the few capable of executing such a task. This context made the soldiers' guarded statements all the more intriguing. One German lieutenant, captured on May 3, 1945, claimed his company had received verbal orders during the final week of April to prepare for its special transfer from the Lake Como region. He insisted the mission never commenced, but his description of the route, north through Voltolina and east toward the Brenner Corridor, matched the escape patterns OSS and WWII analysts were already studying. Another officer, older and visibly exhausted, stated bluntly, there was talk of an Italian leader. Some believed it was the Duce. Though he later retracted the claim, British interrogators noted that he appeared more frightened than confused. The secrecy surrounding the alleged transfer had created anxiety even among those who spoke of it reluctantly. The reveal came during an interrogation recorded by Captain Reeves on May 4. A Feldwebel sergeant described hearing radio traffic referencing Der Adler Italian, the Italian Eagle. While he could not confirm the identity of the person in question, he explained that the term was used only in connection with operations involving political or symbolic significance. The sergeant emphasized that no written record existed because most of the orders were spoken. This mirrored claims from other captured officers, creating a pattern far more coherent than chance alone could explain. Yet investigators faced an impossible challenge. The closer they came to identifying a potential extraction effort, the more the documentary trail evaporated. German files had been burned, scattered, or abandoned in flooded cellars. Radio logs were missing entire days. Field desks had been emptied. When British intelligence searched a commandeered command post in Vipitino, they found only fragments of maps, a few coded message templates, and charred corners of what might have been operational orders. The destruction was too thorough to be accidental. A modern application of this investigation highlights a fundamental truth of intelligence work. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when secrecy is an objective. The silence in the archives, the missing logs, and the verbal-only commands were themselves clues. The more thoroughly a trail had been scrubbed, the more it suggested that something had indeed taken place. Still, the evidence remained circumstantial. British interrogators were careful not to jump to conclusions. They cross-referenced every testimony, every recovered scrap of paper, every intercepted message. But contradictions persisted. Some Volkschirmjäger officers insisted that the Italian Eagle was a minor fascist official hiding from partisans. Others maintained it was a code name used for moving sensitive documents rather than people. And a few flatly denied hearing the term at all. As the investigation advanced, a quiet tension settled over the Allied units working the Brenner Corridor. They were racing time, trying to determine whether Mussolini, or someone acting in his name, had reached the Austrian border in the final hours of the war. Each day brought new prisoners, new stories, and new fragments of intelligence that either muddied or clarified the picture. But the overarching thread remained stubbornly unresolved. Had an elite German team been deployed to extract Mussolini, or were the Allies merely chasing the last echoes of wartime deception? The close of this chapter left British intelligence with a perplexing truth. They had uncovered convincing hints of a clandestine operation, yet not a single piece of definitive proof. And as they sifted through the ruins of the Reich's final days, one pressing question grew louder. If Mussolini, or his double, had indeed been escorted north, where did the trail ultimately end? By the second week of May 1945, northern Italy was quieting, but in the mountains and valleys stretching toward Austria, a different kind of battle had begun. One not fought with rifles or artillery, but with intercepted signals, coded transmissions, and fragmented intelligence reports. British field security units operating out of Como and Bolzano were no longer hunting enemy troops. Instead, they were piecing together a final elusive puzzle. And it was during this tense transition into peacetime that they intercepted a series of radio messages containing a cryptic codename that would haunt post-war investigations for decades: Italian Eagle. The term appeared only twice, briefly, faintly, and just long enough to ignite suspicion that someone important was still in motion beyond the Alps. The struggle to interpret these signals fell on the shoulders of British operators familiar with late-war German cipher habits. Much of the German command structure in Italy had already collapsed, yet remnants of SS and Wehrmacht communications units continued transmitting in scattered pockets. One such pocket, believed to be operating near the Reszchen Pass in western Austria, emitted an incomplete burst of coded traffic that drew immediate attention. It referenced Einsatzgruppe E7 securing Italian Eagle for movement. The message ended abruptly, as if the transmitter had been switched off mid-sentence. Analysts knew this wasn't a routine communication. SS units rarely used such phrasing unless referring to either sensitive intelligence material or human assets of political value. Insight into British decoding practices reveals how seriously such fragments were taken. Even after the German surrender, Allied signal intelligence continued around the clock. The Field Security Section, FSS, teams stationed in South Tyrol had instructions to track any transmissions that suggested the movement of high-ranking officials or classified materials. With fascist leaders attempting to flee the advancing Allies, British command feared a last-minute escape into Austria, where pockets of SS loyalists were believed to be hiding. They had reason to be cautious. Several high-ranking Nazi officials had already been captured attempting disguised border crossings. The reveal came as British units traced the origin of the intercepted signals to the vicinity of Norders, just across the Austrian border. Patrols combing the mountainous terrain recovered a destroyed SS communications outpost, its equipment smashed, papers burned, and logs missing. But they discovered one item that deepened the mystery: a partially burned message slip containing only the words "Eagle arrival confirmed, standby for transport." The time code aligned within 2 hours of the earlier intercepted transmission. No names. No location details. Only the implication that someone or something had made it across the border. This discovery prompted field security investigators to revisit reports from Italy's partisan networks, many of which were contradictory or politically tinted. Some partisans near Lake Como insisted Mussolini never left the region alive. Others claimed he had been escorted north by German troops before the convoy at Dongo was intercepted. The British did not take these accounts at face value. Partisan groups often embellished their stories or competed for credit. Yet the radio intercepts hinted at a movement far more organized than any partisan rumor. British analysts also examined captured SS officers, hoping to match them with units operating near the Austrian frontier. Several admitted knowledge of a protection detail, but insisted it involved safeguarding sensitive documents from falling into Allied hands. Others denied any such escort existed. A former SS Sturmbannführer stated cryptically, the Italian leader's fate was sealed long before the end. But papers can be replaced by men. His phrasing puzzled interrogators. What exactly could be replaced by men, unless there had been a substitution, or a double? Nevertheless, the evidence still lacked a definitive link to Mussolini. The Allies were fully aware of the political stakes. Confirming even the possibility of his escape could destabilize Italy at a moment when the new government was struggling to assert control. It could also panic the civilian population, still traumatized by years of occupation. Thus, British command instructed their teams to verify every finding with absolute caution. And while these radio intercepts were suspicious, they were not proof. They were hints, powerful, tantalizing, but inconclusive. Modern intelligence scholars often point to this phase of the investigation as a lesson in the limitations of signals intelligence. A single intercepted term, a destroyed outpost, a burned message slip. None of these establish truth on their own. But together, they form a pattern that suggests deliberate obfuscation. Someone had intended to hide the movement of the Italian Eagle, whatever or whoever it was. And the fact that the trail went cold in Western Austria only heightened the sense that the operation, whatever its nature, had been completed or terminated. As British teams pushed deeper into Austria, they found no body, no documents, no convoy matching Mussolini's known entourage. The absence of these elements could indicate that Mussolini had never been there at all. But it could also suggest that if an extraction had occurred, it was far more covert than initially believed. Likely handled by a small SS unit operating outside formal oversight, with orders given verbally and records destroyed immediately afterward. The chapter closed with no certainty, only a chilling ambiguity. The last radio intercept regarding Italian Eagle had been recorded at 3:14 on May 3, 1945. After that, silence. No follow-up signals. No captured couriers. No surviving logs. The line went dead, as if swallowed by the mountains themselves. And this silence left Allied investigators with a single nagging question. If the Italian Eagle truly reached Austria, did he arrive as a fugitive still at large, or as a secret that someone went to great lengths to bury in the war's final hours? In the months following Germany's surrender, as Europe tried to steady itself amid ruins and political uncertainty, a quieter but deeply consequential inquiry continued behind closed doors. Allied intelligence, both American OSS and British SIS, worked meticulously to reconstruct the final days of the Italian Social Republic. Their task was not simply to record history, but to verify it. And at the center of their scrutiny lay a single unresolved question. Had Benito Mussolini truly died at Dongo on April 28, 1945, or had the dictator's fate been deliberately obscured by the fog of war, partisan politics, or an escape operation that succeeded just long enough to vanish into the collapsing Axis network? What investigators found was not a definitive answer, but an accumulation of contradictions that refused to align into a single narrative. The struggle for clarity began with an overwhelming volume of conflicting testimonies. American interrogators at the newly established Allied screening centers in Milan and Verona interviewed over 100 captured fascist officials between May and July 1945. Their stories varied wildly. Some swore Mussolini never left the Lake Como region. Others insisted he had transferred vehicles multiple times, shedding identifiable guards for a smaller, more discreet escort. Several even claimed he had been separated from the Dongo convoy hours before partisan forces intercepted it. OSS analysts compared these accounts against radio logs, partisan statements, and the timeline of German withdrawals. No two sources fully agreed. Insight into these contradictions revealed an even deeper complexity. Mussolini's inner circle had splintered in the final days of the war, each faction shaping its own version of events for personal survival. Some loyalists sought to minimize their involvement, portraying themselves as powerless. Others exaggerated heroism or proximity to the dictator to gain leniency. British SIS officers reviewing these statements noted that motivations often diverged as sharply as the accounts themselves. As one internal memo dated June 12, 1945 observed, "Every witness seeks advantage. Truth lies buried beneath self-preservation." Yet the most troubling inconsistencies emerged not from fascist testimony, but from partisan accounts, stories that formed the backbone of the official narrative. When British and American investigators interviewed members of Italy's 52nd Garibaldi Brigade, they found that the timeline of Mussolini's capture at Dongo shifted subtly with each retelling. Some partisans emphasized their role in intercepting the convoy. Others described an arrest that unfolded with suspicious efficiency. One partisan officer admitted that the body identified as Mussolini had been moved multiple times before Allied observers arrived, ostensibly to secure the area. This movement complicated forensic certainty and raised questions about whether a body swap could have occurred, accidental or intentional. The reveal sharpened as investigators examined the post-war political context. Italy, eager to stabilize, had immense motivation to solidify a clean, decisive narrative. Mussolini captured and executed by partisans, the fascist era closed definitively. A prolonged investigation into a possible escape, or even a momentary disappearance, could have undermined the fragile new government. British SIS officers noted this political pressure in later declassified documents, though they stopped short of alleging deliberate cover-up. Still, the timing of official announcements and the speed with which Mussolini's death was publicized left room for doubt. American analysts sought physical evidence, hoping it might ground the conflicting testimonies. But much of the material record had already been compromised. The clothing Mussolini supposedly wore at his execution was missing. His personal effects were scattered or taken as trophies. Even photographs from the scene revealed discrepancies. Lighting, shadows, and positioning differed across images purportedly taken minutes apart. These anomalies did not prove deception, but they eroded confidence in the official timeline. A modern application of these findings underscores a timeless lesson. Major historical events are often reconstructed through imperfect, politically influenced fragments. Truth, in such circumstances, is rarely absolute. Instead, it emerges as a spectrum, one shaped by memory, motive, fear, and opportunity. In Mussolini's case, the evidence pointed toward a tangled middle ground. Perhaps he did die at Dongo as history records, but perhaps not in the clear, linear fashion later retold. Perhaps he was captured after attempting escape. Or perhaps the man seized by partisans was not the dictator at all, but a loyalist attempting to masquerade as him. As OSS and SIS investigators compiled their final reports, one detail stood out. Despite hundreds of interviews, dozens of field investigations, and thousands of documents reviewed, no single version of Mussolini's final hours could be confirmed without contradiction. The official narrative prevailed because it was the simplest, and because wartime Italy needed closure. But the lingering gaps, missing files, and inconsistencies never truly disappeared. The chapter closed not with certainty, but with a lingering unease. Mussolini's fate, at least in the intelligence archives, had never been airtight. And as the last Allied analysts left their Italian field offices in late 1945, one unanswered question remained suspended in the silence. If Mussolini had slipped past Lake Como even briefly, if he had reached the Alpine passes under German escort, what new axis of influence might he have attempted to build in those chaotic final hours of the war? And how close had the Allies come to facing a darker, more uncertain post-war reality? In the end, the mystery persisted, not because truth was hidden, but because history in wartime is rarely as definitive as the world wants it to be.